This session's called Accelerate Your Developer Productivity with AI, Embrace the Future Now. And you'll notice how excited the title is because I ran it through ChatGPT to make it sound cooler. So that's why it sounds so nice. So let me start. I'll just say a couple words about myself. Kate pretty much said everything. Important. A couple other side notes. I'm working on a product for frequent speakers, and I'm showing some of the code in here because I'm allowed to send my own code to an LLM, unlike my clients. And the podcast is actually called the Stack D podcast. And Daniel Hinojosa, who's also presenting here, is one of my co-hosts. So if you like podcasts, you should check that out. I'm also a Java champion. And I'm also the project lead of the Eclipse documentation for Jakarta EE project as well. So that's me. I want to get a handle from the audience. How many of you are currently using like some code completion tool like Copilot or something like that? GitHub Copilot. Okay, how many of you are actually using it at work? Okay, so a decent number of you. How many of your managers know you're using it at work? All right, good. And how many of you are just using, you may throw some code into ChatGPT or use it to generate something, but you're not really using Copilot or anything else? Okay. All right, and how many of you are using some other code generation tool other than Copilot or ChatGPT? Okay, good. All right, so I'll give you, I just want to point out, I'm coming to you from a developer perspective. I write applications, web applications, enterprise applications, etc. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not an AI guy. I've just been following the AI stuff. And of course, in the last year or so, I've been following a lot more, right? So I'm probably similar to most of you. And, I've known for a long time that AI existed and that there are different types of AI. So what I wanted to do when I decided to do this talk was think about, okay, well, we're all excited about these large language models, but we also need to remember the entire field of AI, right? So I promptly went to ChatGPT and said, what are the fields of AI? And it told me that there are all of these fields. So most of us are familiar with machine learning, right? And deep learning, which is really just a subset of machine learning. And large language models are pretty much in this area here, right? They are a lot of deep learning, a lot of natural language processing. We don't really think about it, but that's kind of a key element, right? Because we're typing stuff into the LLMs to get a response back, right? So there's a big part of natural language processing. But there's all these other different areas. And remember, computer vision is a big part, right? And a lot of what happens on our phones with images, that's a lot of computer vision stuff. Robotics, that's part of AI. That's a huge part. If you're ever bored one day, you can find videos of companies that are building complete humanoid robots with OpenAI models built in that talk and do things. Sort of the whole computer robotics revolution we're all afraid of. That's happening now. Expert systems, planning and scheduling, speech recognition, of course, very important. Agent-based systems, etc. And remember, all these things are going to basically collide, right, in all sorts of different interesting ways. So if we think about, just our coding tools and improving our development process, we end up with the bolded items, right? We've got speech recognition because some tools, specifically the VS Code Copilot world, you can do speech stuff. So you can talk to your IDE and ask it questions the same way you would if you typed it, right? So you can imagine a world where some of our coding might actually be done using speech if it's faster than typing it in, right? And of course, we talked about deep learning and machine learning being sort of the core things in natural language processing. But there's also some element of agent-based systems in there as well, and reinforcement learning. So just for your edification, an agent-based system is a multi-agent system that might do distributed code analysis or collaborative code generations and review. Reinforcement learning basically are tools that adapt and improve the recommendations based on feedback loops with developers, right? So these are very key things because you want your coding tools to become smarter over time, right? So you want your models to be more fine-tuned as you build more applications, and then also you want it to understand how you're doing things and do things the same way. And this becomes more important when you extrapolate it among an organization as opposed to just an individual developer. Okay, so I thought, well, let's break it down into what AI and large language models, what can it actually do for us, right? And sort of the first thing is answering technical questions, right? You can go to ChatGPT or some of the other tools we'll talk about, and you can ask it some technical question. And sometimes, a lot of times, it might have an answer. Sometimes it'll make up stuff, and you'll be like, oh, okay, that library doesn't actually exist, or that method seems like it should exist, but it doesn't. But it is useful for answering questions. And I think this is one of the areas where AI really shines, is really understanding large volumes of information, right? Another area is code generation, right? So these models are really good at writing code. And, they're good at writing code given enough input and direction, let's put it that way. So that's there as well. There is also code completion. Code comprehension. And this is actually one of the most important areas. And the other way to think of this is as context, right? So basically, how many people have either vaguely familiar, have some idea about RAG, retrieval augmented generation models? Okay, so basically, when you talk to ChatGPT or any LLM, it has no idea what you're talking about. It just knows how to complete stuff, right? But you need to give it information, and that's called a context. So what I call code comprehension is the idea of understanding your actual application, your code base that you're working with. And some tools do that better than others. So that's what I mean by code comprehension, actually understanding the code that you're working with. Then there's code translation. So one of the cool features of these tools is that they can actually translate your code from one language to another. Now, I haven't had a real good use case for this personally, but it seems kind of cool. It's fun to just see, okay, if I did this in Python, what would it be like? If I did this in Java, what would it be like? So that's a fun thing you can do. Much more important if you were converting an entire code base. There's also unit test generation. I have not really used this extensively, but most of these tools can generate some basic unit tests to get you started at least. They may not be perfect, but they can be useful. Another one is writing docs. Everyone says, well, I hear a lot of people say, developers hate writing docs, so these tools can generate documentation for your methods and your classes for you. I may be strange because I actually like writing documentation, so take that with a grain of salt. But if you don't like writing documentation, you can have it write Java docs or JS docs or whatever documentation for whatever language you're using. Another feature which is slowly rolling out in different services is the ability to work with pull requests, right? So we all review code or write code that other people review, right? And there's some ways that we can actually help with that process. We can maybe write a better description of the PR to begin with, or do some preliminary checks automatically when the pull request occurs, okay? So that's an area where AI is helping out as well. And then, of course, the most popular one is code completion. So this is where we basically get advanced autocomplete for what we're typing. So the tool will try and figure out what it thinks we might want to do and then generate some code based on that. So once we go beyond that, of course, there's a whole bunch of other uses that I'm not covering here. Things like QA, there's all sorts of things happening in the world of QA and automated test development and things like that I'm not really going to cover here. Of course, you can actually generate presentations, you can do outlines for training materials, lots of stuff with video and art and writing, music, etc. But that's not really what we're covering today. So, this is all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, the question is, does this stuff really make you more productive, right? And, I would say, my experience is that, generally speaking, yes. Sometimes it wastes time. Sometimes I feel like it gives me a wrong answer, and then I waste all this time dealing with it or something. But I think overall, it makes me feel more productive. But, that's just what my personal opinion is. Data is, of course, more important. And GitHub, of course, has commissioned a study, which they have an academic paper about, etc. And they basically say that most developers think they're more productive with AI tools. I mean, specifically, this is Copilot, but they're also feel a little less frustrated, a little more fulfilled. They get to focus on more satisfying work, and I think that's definitely true because the drudgery stuff is actually the stuff that the tools are really good at, like especially writing little scripts and things like that. Their efficiency and flow is better for repetitive tasks, more in the flow, etc. Now, of course, this is just one study. I haven't seen a whole lot of studies. I think we'll see more come out over time, but that was their perspective. This is a small study, right? They only had like 95 developers, and they split them in half. But they did find that the ones that use Copilot, a little bit more of them finished, but they're about 50% faster, right? So, that's pretty good, right? And of course, that's what it says on the Copilot website, 50% faster, But regardless of whether it's 55, 65, 75, or 25, any kind of improvement is something that's probably a good thing, right? So what is the catch? So the first catch is that a lot of these tools are new. And there's a couple that are a little bit older, like Copilot, but even Copilot's not that old, right? So I purposely did this with an older version of DALL-E so I could get the bad text going on there. So they're under construction. So there's a lot of beta stuff, a lot of stuff which doesn't work yet. The other thing is that you kind of want to make sure you have some idea what's behind the curtain, right? So a lot of this stuff is fun to play with, but when it comes to actually using it for work, is this OpenAI that you're using? Is it Anthropic, using cloud? Is it something else that's being used in the back end? What's happening to your data? What's the story there? So keep in mind about what's on the actual back end. And then, of course, everybody wants you to sign up for a subscription because, of course, they need to make money doing all this stuff. And as we all know, these large language models are not cheap to run. I heard somewhere, actually, I forgot the example, but any query into like ChatGPT or something is going to be actually uses a large amount of water. And that's basically to cool all the CPU that's being used. Okay, so they're expensive. Hopefully that'll come down over time. But the reality is anything that you use, you're going to have to sign up for or use a trial to play with. And your company will have to buy it if they actually want to use it long term. So let's start with the granddaddy of them all, ChatGPT. How many people have used ChatGPT? Okay, so most of you. Good. Sometimes I say how many people have not done stuff, but people tend to not raise their hand when to say that they didn't do something, I find. So I do it the other way. So one of the key things to remember about ChatGPT is, first of all, is that it can, of course, do all of these things, right? And I mentioned here that the code comprehension is limited. Whoops, all right. Sorry, let me go back here. So the code comprehension is limited because it only knows about the code you paste into ChatGPT, right? So now, of course, it knows about all code on the internet. So if you ask it questions about a library, it might know the answer. But when it comes to actually knowing about some specific code, it knows about the code you paste into ChatGPT. Okay. And another important thing to remember, it can, of course, do all these things. It can answer technical questions. It can write documentation. It can do code generation, all sorts of fun stuff. But remember that the chats are used for training by default. So if you don't turn it off, all of your whatever you paste into ChatGPT is going to be used for training additional models, which probably is not what you want for your company's code. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can, of course, turn this off. And another thing is that data sent to the ChatGPT or the OpenAI API doesn't actually get used for training purposes. So there, it's a little bit safer, it's more ephemeral, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to show a couple things in ChatGPT, even though most of you have seen it before. And we will turn on mirroring here. Okay. All right. So first thing I find is that it's pretty good for general questions, right? So I was on a project. I do front-end and back-end development, right? So, and what we need to do is we had some SaaS. We wanted to integrate SaaS with Vue. And I was like, I have no idea how to do this. So I asked ChatGPT, how can I integrate existing SaaS files with SaaS used inside of my Vue components, right? And it gives you a boilerplate, yeah, SaaS is installed. I don't really care about that. But this is actually what I needed to know, this little bit right here. And this actually is true, that's helpful. And it gives you some stuff about organizing things. Says you can do a global import. And gives you details about importing it into a specific Vue component, which was useful. And then it also tells me that I can scope it as well if I want to. So it's actually a very useful answer. And I actually used this on the project. We integrated SaaS. There's a lot more we had to do, but this was the piece of information I needed to know. So that was helpful. Here's another example. And this is just a made-up example, but I think it's a good example. Oh, no. Oh, come on now. All right. Let's reconnect here. Can everybody read this in the back? Can you guys read this in the back? All right, you have good eyesight, good deal. All right, so this I think is useful for too. So if you've got like a sort of a sort of generic thing that you're trying to do, that's a well-known problem, these tools are really great. So I said, build an OpenAI spec for a tic-tac-toe game, right? And I actually spelled it wrong. I said dough instead of toe, and it figured out what it meant. Wow, look at that. So it actually generated an OpenAI spec for tic-tac-toe. And the base path is game. That makes sense. You can create a game. You can get the game's current status. You can make a move. I'm going to use this patch for that. It's okay. And it tells you what the move needs to be, and tell you if the move's accepted, etc. It gives me a schema. So it's not great, but if I wanted a starting point for some sort of thing that's a well-known problem, it's very useful, right? So it helps me do that kind of stuff. This is an interesting thing. So these tools all say they can refactor stuff, right? So I said, all right, well, let me refactor this code. And then this is code for my side project, so I know that I can paste it in there without anyone getting mad at me. So this is a lit component, which is TypeScript, and it is for displaying a speaker profile. And I said, refactor this code, right? And it refactored it, and it tries to clean stuff up, and then it explains very clearly what it changed. It simplified my getters and setters. It used more optional chaining, which is a JavaScript/TypeScript feature like this, because I had, if it's null, then do this. So it used optional chaining for that. It tried to clean up some stuff down here in this sorting. And looking at this, I'm not really sure it did it correctly. And this is kind of the thing you need to keep in mind. This goes for any tool that does refactoring. You got to reread the code and make sure it actually didn't screw something up. So I'm not usually a big fan of this, but they all sort of do this in certain ways. And some will have a better idea about your existing standards than others. This is an example where I said, all right, well, do this. They all say they explain code, right? So I pasted some code in, and this is actually Java code. This is using the Mutiny reactive API in Quarkus. to save some data, right? And it's kind of a weird, hard to read method. If you were in my session yesterday, you may have seen this method. So I said, all right, what does it do? And it actually gave me a very good explanation. Tells me what the method is. It told me specifically that it uses the Mutiny library, which is often used in Quarkus applications. And then it broke down all the parameters and everything. So this is pretty useful. Okay. And of course, you can use ChatGPT for all sorts of stuff. But you know, this is nice. But the thing about ChatGPT is it's not actually, it doesn't know anything about your code. It's not available in your IDE. You have to get a separate subscription, and it's a general purpose tool. It's not, it happens to be able to do coding stuff, but it does a whole lot more. So why are you dealing with that, with the non-coding part of it, right? So just a couple more things about it. The GPT-4 model, which is much better, which is what I was just using for those examples. That costs money. It's $20 a month, $20 a month. But now it is better. GPT-4 can actually browse the web. It's more up to date. It can generate images, all sorts of fancy stuff like that. Okay. So, of course, there's lots of integrations in other projects. So that's all fine and dandy, right? But there's a lot more to the world than just ChatGPT, right? So how many people have heard of Find, P-H-I-N-D? Okay. So Find, to me, is really what we want as developers. So Find does all of these sort of things that we talked about with ChatGPT, right? But it actually is current, so you don't have to get a subscription to get up-to-date results, which is nice. It actually cites the sources, so if you want to know where it got the information it's giving you, it'll give you that information. It has free and paid tiers. And let's take a look at it. So when I have a question, I usually don't use ChatGPT, I use Find. And you know, if you go to the main Find site, you get sort of the search engine look, right? You know, ask me anything, what are you stuck on, etc. But I'll show you some specific questions. So I was on a project where we have a lot of tests written in test-ng, and I wanted to see how it compared to the JUnit rule, because there's a JUnit rule annotation that I needed to use, and I wanted to make sure I was understanding how it worked. So I asked Find. And Find will use, they have their own models, and they often also have GPT models as well, okay? So it gives me an answer, and it tells me that test-ng does not have a direct equivalent to JUnit's rule annotation, explains more about it, etc., etc. And this is actually quite accurate. But the best part is that if I'm wondering where it got that information, it gives me the actual results right here, right? So I can actually look at all the results that it used to come up with that information. And sometimes I just end up going to those results, okay? But we know those results are more relevant than you may get from Google, okay? So I actually use Find more than anything else, and I actually I use the free version. And often what I'll do with Find is I'll paste in some exception, right? So I was having some issue with test containers and a Selenium container timeout exception, and I typed it in here. Sometimes I'll paste like part of a stack trace or just the name of the exception, etc. And it tried to tell me something about this timeout exception that happens with specific versions of test containers and Selenium. Turned out this had nothing to do with my problem. So this is kind of a waste of time, right? And I tried to explain, I said, the timeout is coming from the host port wait strategy. Didn't help. So this is a bust. But usually it's pretty useful. Here's another example. I was working on a Bitbucket pipeline with a custom Docker container running on-prem, right? Which was a custom runner, right? So I was getting this Docker exceeded memory limit. And I was like, okay, well, there's so many Docker containers involved here. I don't know which Docker is talking about, right? Because the Bitbucket runner runs on Docker, and then my build runs on Docker, and then I had Docker inside the build. And I was like, I don't know which thing has memory issues, whatever. So I put this in here, and this actually did answer my question. It talked about the limits of, there's different memory limits for different parts of the Bitbucket pipeline. And I was like, all right, great, that's what I need to know. So that was a good one. Here's another one where I was writing some code, and what I wanted was, Java has functional interfaces for all of the lambdas that you use, right? and I'm familiar with all like by function, etc. But I was like, I just want to send in a Lambda that has no parameters and returns no value. I have no idea what the interface is for that because no one ever does that, right? And I asked it, and it turns out it's just the runnable interface. So it's good like that. So if you just want a great way to just ask questions, things like that, Find is a great thing. They have a VS Code plugin as well, so you can do all the same searches inside of your IDE. And the good thing about that is that you can provide more context easier, right? So you can actually point to specific parts of your code and use that as context for the question that Find is answering, okay? So great tool. All right, let me go back here. We will undo that. Hold on a second. Okay. I seem to have lost my presenter window here, which is just wonderful. So let's do that. We'll play this again. We will move this to the other window. Now I've still got, I thought I would be able to do this, seamlessly go back and forth. Not so much. Okay, supposedly that went to my display here. And I still do not see it. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we started with just talking about different, we talked about ChatGPT, we talked about Find. Those don't really have much to do with your IDE though, except Find does have a VS Code plugin. But it's important to understand that all the different IDEs have plugins available for all this AI stuff. And I use two different IDEs. I use IntelliJ and I use VS Code. I use IntelliJ mostly, but sometimes I use VS Code. I get rid of that. So what I did was I went into IntelliJ and I went into VS Code and I typed in AI. I didn't type in, AI programming tool, whatever. And I got these huge lists here. And so while I may be talking about a few tools, there are dozens and dozens in each of, for each of these products, right? And a lot of third-party developers, a lot of random people, a lot of small companies, etc. And, so this is kind of the early days. In the next couple of years, this will shake out a bit. But there's a lot of tools out there. And basically, most tools will support VS Code, any JetBrains IDE, or Neo VM, or Neo VI, I think is what it's called. Anyone out there use Eclipse? Oh, nobody. Wow. Oh, there's one person. Okay. Brave person. All right. So if you use Eclipse, I did this presentation, I think towards the end of last year. There was no plugins for Eclipse. And I was like, man, if you use Eclipse, you don't even get any AI love. But now there actually are a few. So this little list here these are all of the AI plugins for Eclipse, and only a couple of them are actually like coding tools. But there's actually one for Copilot. It's not by Microsoft, but it does exist. So there is a little bit of love for Eclipse now as well. So let's talk a little bit about Copilot. Most of you guys have used it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But I will point out, of course, that it is the market leader. And it looks like we lost our lovely little bubbles here, so those will come back in a minute, hopefully. There's business and enterprise editions. If you want to see some of the new features that are coming out in Copilot, you can go to GitHub Next, and they've got prototypes they've worked on over time. One of the most interesting ones they had was an experiment for docs where it would actually let you interrogate the documentation and get answers back, which I thought was pretty cool, especially if you're working with an open source repo, things like that. So that's kind of a neat feature. That one got sunsetted. So what they do with these GitHub Next projects is they come out with them, they test them out, and then they add them to a product or not, depending on how things go. So these are all the different features that it has. And you can see we've got better code comprehension. It's getting better and better with Copilot, getting better at understanding the whole context of your workspace. And we also have working with pull requests. So this is apparently available only in the enterprise version. But in that version, you can get some AI to help you generate pull requests and things like that as well. The Eclipse support that it has here is actually from a third-party provider, so it's not actually by Microsoft. And one of the things that I don't like about Copilot is that it's very VS Code centric. Like basically all the features go to VS Code first, and some features haven't even made their way into the JetBrains IDEs yet. So to me, that's a drawback. It does currently use a GPT-4 model, but of course, it's tailored for code, right? So it's not going to answer general purpose questions and things like that. Okay. The other thing that you can do is use the Microsoft Speech plugin in VS Code to say stuff to the Copilot chat, which is kind of a neat feature. So just do a very quick demo of Copilot. And hopefully I won't have a problem with my monitors again. We'll see how this goes. And what I'll do... Oh, lovely. Okay, so let me mirror displays here. Okay. All right, so if you look over here, we've got the GitHub Copilot chat. So there's two levels, right? There's sort of the code completion aspect, and then there's a chat aspect. And the chat can actually do some useful things, and it has some idea of what we call the context, right? So I have opened this queries class here. This has some queries that use, again, that reactive API from Quarkus, right? And this will, I basically said, okay, what does this class do? And it explained pretty well, okay, what it does, okay? So I can use the chat to ask questions like that. And then, of course, with the speech plugin, I can say things like, I don't know, does this code use OpenAI? All right. And presumably it will tell me it doesn't, because it doesn't. Okay, so it gives me some idea of what it does, which is nice. But tells me it doesn't use OpenAI. So if you want to use voice, you can do that too. And then, of course, we all know that Copilot can do fancy code completion as well. So if I'm in the middle of some method, I can then, I can do my normal code completion. But, if I am waiting for it, sometimes it'll come up with, so it tells me, oh, yes, I can do this. Okay, I have no idea if this is what I want to do, but it looks cool, right? So half the time it's what you want, half the time it's not. It also can do a lot of the generation of documentation. So let's say I got rid of that. Okay, this is actually pretty good docs, right? And then I do this here. And any minute now, I should get a little... So that may be a different plugin there. It's not doing it. Usually it'll give you like a little, documentation thing. I can, of course, ask the chat to do the documentation, but but usually it's pretty good at doing documentation as well. So I'm not going to get all into it, but it can do that. It can generate code snippets. It can generate full code depending on what you tell it to do. And then, of course, if there's like an API or something that's in your code, it can do stuff based on that as well. Yeah, so most of you use Copilot, but that's basically the deal. The chat feature has gotten pretty powerful. They also have the ability to add as context your workspace, etc. And the other thing it has in the chat are specific commands. So explain, search, API, fix, take that with a grain of salt, new, etc. And then, of course, you can generate tests. So if I want to generate tests for my workspace, so it gives me some tests for the queries class, uses some Kito, which I'm a big fan of. Okay, all that, all looks lovely, right? Now, what I like to do with this is like, so it's got this basic test here, right? Now, it turns out I do actually have I believe there's a queries. Oh, there's no queries test. I thought we had one. Oh, well. Anyways, so sometimes this is useful, sometimes it's not, but also you can guide it and say, okay, use this library, use that library, etc. So, etc. Okay, so that's my quick Copilot demo. Okay, so how many people have heard of tab 9 before? Tab 9? Okay, so one of you. So tab 9 is another coding assistant. It has Pro and Enterprise editions. But the key difference is that while using Copilot, you basically know that you're sending stuff to Microsoft and OpenAI, right? Tab 9 is built much more around privacy. So they have their own models, and they also have the ability to have things either via a virtual private network or VPC or on-prem deployments. So if you're an enterprise or a company and you actually want to have your stuff privately, you can do it with tab 9 without having to worry about OpenAI. Okay. And another key thing is that their models are trained only on code that has permissive licenses. So one of the key concerns about all the code that is consumed by the GPT-4 model is that it basically goes through everything with licenses that are not permissive, right? So it's not really the most legal thing. So if you're worried about that, tab 9 might be a good choice for you. Okay, and it supports all these different things. So it has very good understanding of the actual context. And so I mentioned RAG before, right? And that's basically the idea of providing additional context to a query to an LLM, right? And you can do this by creating what are called embeddings. And those embeddings have information about the context that you want to provide. So tab 9 actually goes through your entire workspace and creates embeddings that it can send to its own models, and it can send them to a third-party model if you want to. Okay. So it's pretty powerful in terms of understanding the entire context, and then also of basically allowing you to build your code based on that as well. When it comes to an entire organization, it can actually scan the code for your whole organization and then use that as a way to train the model so that it provides suggestions based on your whole organization's code base as well. Okay. So I have here, actually, I don't know if I have tab 9 chat open here. Let me just check real quick here. Okay. And so I'm just going to open up this one. So I think what I'll do, I think I'll skip this demo, but basically the benefit you get with tab 9 is that it has very similar semantics to what you have with Copilot. and all the things we talked about with ChatGPT, right? But it's more tailored for your particular code base, and also it can be much more private. So definitely a better option in some situations, depending on what you want to do. Okay, so another one, has anyone heard of SourceGraph before? Okay, so this is an interesting area. So they have a plugin called Cody that supports all the different features that we've discussed. And SourceGraph has actually been around for a while. And what they have is the ability to scan a code base and create a graph for it, and then allow you to search against that graph. So they already had the ability to have a really good understanding of a code base. And then when all the AI stuff started, they said, well, why don't we go ahead and make that into a product that does AI coding based on top of our SourceGraph graph, okay? So one of the key things, also a lot of their stuff is open source, so if you want to go, you can actually look at the plugins they build. They're all open source, which is great. They have very configurable commands for their plugins. This is true also for some of the other ones as well. And they also have swappable LLMs, so you can use Claude 2, OpenAI, GPT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have plugins. Those plugins are for VS Code first, then JetBrains, and then NeoVim. So let's take a look at Cody. Okay. And what we'll do, we will maximize this, then we'll go over here. Okay. So I'm back in IntelliJ here. Actually, let me go to VS Code. So over here is the Cody chat. Okay, and you can see I can pick different models that I want to use. While tab 9 is really good about, saying, okay, we're super private, you can use only our models, or you can use GPT models, etc. SourceGraph is more about saying, okay, so we have a really good understanding of your code base, but we still use third-party LLMs, so you need to worry about their terms and restrictions for that as well. So for the chat, you can pick which model you want, and then you can, of course, ask questions, right? And the thing about Cody is that it does have a good understanding of the code base, right? So if I said, how can I make a GraphQL call to get a speaker profile? Okay, so let's see what it comes up with there. Okay, so look, it gets read 579 lines from 5 files. So what it did was it found what it thought were the relevant things. And this was actually a good choice because it found the GraphQL API class, right? Looked at all that stuff and then came back and said, I could do this. And this is actually completely correct, okay? So this code, this particular repo is just the backend, right? It just has a GraphQL API, and it basically told me what the front end needs to create in order to make a query against it, just by reading the API. And what's nice about that is I didn't have to say, hey, use this piece of code. It figured it out automatically, okay? Whereas with some of the other tools like Copilot, you have to say, okay, hey, use this thing, or you have to have it open in your editor to give it the context, okay? So Cody's a little bit better about that. It also does a lot of the sort of normal code completion things that you've seen other tools do as well. And then, of course, it has the ability to, you can look for specific files if you want to. It also has different built-in commands you can pick as well. So, all right. And then also what you'll notice here, if I go back to this code, sometimes I can get a little sort of AI suggestion box. And the AI suggestion box will give me choices that I can use in either Cody or Copilot or whatever other tool I'm trying to use. So, and the reason that SourceGraph Cody is so cool in terms of understanding your code base is that they have this. indexing things. So there's actually, if you go to sourcegraph.com, you'll see this. Okay. Actually, that is not the one you'll see. We'll go to the code search feature. And okay, so that's not the default page. But what you can do basically is you can do code search, and you can search in different repos. You can search across any GitHub repo. Okay, you can use regular expressions. You can actually tailor your query in different ways by type, by different files, etc. And what I have here is I have it actually loaded the SourceGraph tool pointing at my public Jakarta-EE tutorial repo, right? So documentation repo, and it basically, from this, I can ask all sorts of questions about, you know, what's in here, things like that. But also, it gives me a little Ask Cody assistant here, okay? So if I'm signed in, I can then go ask questions against this repo. You can do this with any public GitHub repo. So the fact that they've done this, they have a tool that actually can do searches across lots of repos is a really powerful feature. And so, of course, their enterprise version lets you do that, of course, all the repos you want in your organization, right? And then provide that context when you're asking questions and working with your code locally. So they've got a pretty compelling solution as well. The only caveat is that they always work with third-party LLM providers, so you have to worry about that as well. So. Okay. All right, so that is Cody. I'm not going to do a demo for this one, but it's worth mentioning. Has anyone heard of AWS Code Whisperer before? So a few of you. So AWS has their own tool as well. And to me, this is the number one, like if you are a big AWS shop, you should definitely check out Code Whisperer. But one of the best things about it is that it's very well trained on actual, AWS APIs. So it's really smart about that kind of stuff. The context is kind of small. It's only like, 15, 20 lines in the current file. But it also has it actually does security scans, which is nice. It provides open source licenses for some snippets. And it even tells you if your code looks exactly like some third-party code that it was trained on, it'll actually tell you about it, which is kind of cool because maybe you're using some, your code is a cut and paste from something and it probably shouldn't be. So it's good at letting you know that as well. And it tries to filter out bias, which is a nice thing. The current versions also integrate with Amazon Q. So it has a little Amazon Q chat assistant as well, like everything else. Of course, there are different levels. And what's nice, though, is that you can actually, even if you don't have an AWS account, you can get like a pro, you can create a special account just for using this tool as opposed to having to create a full-fledged AWS account as well, which is nice. So if you're big into AWS, you should definitely take a look at Code Whisperer. Along those lines. So how many people here use JetBrains IDEs? Okay, so some of you. So JetBrains has their own AI assistant. And, this has actually improved quite a bit over the last several months. So it has seamless integration in all of their IDEs. It has a free trial for like 7 days or something, but it does cost money. It's like $8.33 a month, which comes out to about $100 a year if you get the whole year. But that's for the pro version. Of course, there's an enterprise version, which is more expensive. And it has one of the nice things is it actually would do the code completion, but it does it offline if you want it to. Which is really nice because if you want some of the fancy code completion, but you don't want to send all your code to OpenAI or some other model, it'll do some stuff offline, which is nice. And it has basically all the features we've talked about. It has a pretty good idea about your workspace. it has a chat that can answer questions. It can write unit tests. It can do code translations, etc. It can do all of that fun stuff as well. And it's all very well integrated into the JetBrains ecosystem as well. And like most of these products, they're still fleshing it out. They're still building, adding more features, especially more of the enterprise features as well. Currently, they use a combination of OpenAI and JetBrains models together. So if you use the chat stuff, you're are sending stuff to the LLMs. And I forgot to mention this, but for every single slide here, I have at the bottom the privacy policy, because that's very important. I'm a consultant. I want to make sure I don't do anything that will make my clients unhappy. So I always pay attention to this. So especially if you get the slides later, every slide, every particular product has the privacy policy. And all of them will claim that they don't send your data anywhere, but they will tell you if they're working with third-party LLMs, and so you might want to take a look at the privacy policy for the third-party LLM, okay? So, JetBrains, I'll do a quick demo of this. And I'm actually a little bit excited about this one, I think because it's new to me. I had an older version installed previously. Okay, so we're going back. This is TypeScript code, right? What JetBrains has done, and this is similar to what you see in VS Code, is for anything here, let's say I right-click, I can get my AI actions. So these are actually the JetBrains actions. And if you can't read this, you can see it gives me those sort of default things like explain code, suggest refactoring, etc. So I clicked on explain code, and it generates, whoa, that was strange. Oh, wow, it just crashed. Nice. Well, that's new. All right. Let me go back here. Okay. So we'll give it a second to boot up here. So let's say I highlight this method, and then I do AI actions, and I cannot explain code, maybe because it just crashed. So that is lovely. Okay. The demo gods are not with me today, so yes, the AI actions are now disabled. Okay, but it can do these things, like explaining code, factoring, running, and then it also has a chat, which is similar to the other chats you've seen. Also, it allows you to add your own prompts, which is a nice thing. So I think it disabled it because it crashed, I'm assuming. You can add your own prompts. So if you want sort of a default prompt to create, you can do that as well, which is nice. And I find that some of the answers it gave me aren't quite as complete as some of the other tools, but it's a really good start. And what's great about it is that since it's JetBrains, it's always going to be integrated well into their products, whereas you'll find a lot of the third-party tools will go VS Code first, then JetBrains, and then some other tools. So, right now I'm definitely betting on that as being a good long-term choice. Yes, it is available now. Yeah, it was in beta for a while, but it's out now. So all of these tools are out now. A lot of them were in beta last time I did this presentation, but they're out now. So those are just a few of the tools that I've seen that I've played with. Probably the one I use the most these days is Tab 9. That's really more because of the privacy benefit, not necessarily because it's the best one out there. I really like Cody because of their approach. So those are probably my two favorites currently. But there are lots of other things we can watch for, right? When I went through the demo with ChatGPT, pretty much Google Gemini or Anthropic Claude will do all the same sort of things. What's nice about if you just use Gemini's chat, what's cool about it is that it actually will fact check stuff on Google. There's actually a little button to verify it and do a Google search to see if what it made up was actually somewhat logical, which is a nice feature in Gemini. Google does have Gemini Code Assist available now, which of course uses Gemini. It's going to be like all the other Code Assist tools out there. I have not had a chance to play with it. It's a little bit newer, but it is out there. It's available now. So obviously, especially if you are big into Google Cloud, that's definitely a good thing to keep an eye out for. There's one which I installed but haven't played with yet. Is Alibaba has a coding system. Alibaba Cloud, of course, Alibaba is sort of like the AWS of China, and their coding system claims to do a whole bunch of stuff offline, which, of course, for us in the U.S. is generally a good thing from Alibaba. So that's interesting. GitHub Next, I mentioned, of course, which is sort of the next features in GitHub. Pump GPT is not a coding tool, but it's kind of a good idea of some of the other tools we can see out there. It's all about optimizing your AWS spend and also automating some of the AWS support questions that you have. So I think it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind. DiffBlue Cover is a tool that is really more for generating unit tests and integration tests. It's very heavily focused on testing. So that's another one that's out there. Overflow AI has been announced by Stack Overflow. This will probably kill find.com to some degree if they ever do it the way that I would think they should. But it's supposed to provide summaries of sources and also help you write your own Stack Overflow questions. Although when I looked at it for this presentation, I couldn't really find, I feel like they're not really sure what their strategy is. They have some features they've rolled into the Stack Overflow for Teams feature, which is the enterprise version. But I'm not really clear on exactly what's available to the public. But they are doing some stuff there. Another one to look at is Atlassian Intelligence. So Atlassian is building stuff into their products. There's obviously Atlassian folks here you can talk to about that, but they're also adding stuff to Bitbucket as well. All right, so that's pretty much it. Looks like we have about 3 minutes for questions. If you want to find me, you can find me in those places. And if you have any questions, we have like 3 minutes. Thank you.